Good afternoon. We are from Group 2 and we're going to present about International Human Resource Management and Culture. My name is Alif Rafindika.
My name is Evan Kim.
My name is Ahmad Cyril.
And I am Alexander Kilagoli.
I am Adinda Salsabila.
And I'm Ilham Kurnia.
Alded. So this chapter provides a definition and an overview of the nature and importance of national and company culture and its impact on international HRM, as well as providing guidance as to how IHRM can perform its role within MNEs as the advisor and trainer on how to learn from cultural differences and how to use those differences in ways to help build global competitive advantage. Next. The first chapter is going to about the nature and importance of culture. Next. Our textbook defines culture as follows. Culture is the characteristic way of behaving and believing that a group of people have developed over time and share. Next. With this definition, a group's culture gives them a sense of who they are, of belonging, of how they should behave, and provide them the capacity to adapt to circumstances and to transmit this knowledge to succeeding generation or to new employees in the case of organization, and also affects every aspect of the management process, how people think, solve problem, and make decisions for a country or firm. So culture is a powerful force that shapes our thoughts and perception. It affects the way we perceive and judge events and other people, and how we respond to and interpret them, and how we communicate to one another in both spoken and unspoken language. Next. One of the complexity that makes culture so difficult to deal with is its multiple layers of meaning. The 3 layers of culture model present a way to understand culture, with each layer moving from the outside to the inside, representing less and less visible or less explicit values and assumptions, but correspondingly more and more important values and beliefs for determining attitudes and behaviors. These layers include surface culture and hidden culture and invisible culture. For the surface culture, things that are readily observable, such as dress, food, architecture, customs, body language, gestures, etiquette, greeting, and gift giving. And for the hidden culture, which is the middle layer, is values, religion, and philosophies about things like child rearing, views of what is right and wrong. And the invisible or implicit culture, which is the core, is the culture's universal truth. Next. So as people develop an ability to work successfully with different cultures, they typically go through a process such as that illustrated on the slide. This is the development of cross-cultural competence. This approach to building knowledge about another person or group's behavior and values, and eventually adapting to or being able to integrate with that other person's or group's behaviors and attitudes, assume that people must first understand their own cultural values and belief before they can develop an appreciation and respect for other people's cultural differences, which then precedes the eventual ability to move toward reconciliation and integration with different country and organizational cultures. Next.
Now I'm going to explain about country and regional cultures. So a lot of researchers are trying to assess whether the wide variety of cultures can be reduced to limited set of cultures with similar characteristics to help reduce management and HR practices problem in various countries. Next. The best known of the studies of national culture was performed by Geert Hofstede. The study focused on identifying country differences and regional similarities on the basis of a series of work-related factors. Some factors that are identified in his research are the degree of acceptance of power distance between bosses and its subordinates, the degree of individualism or collectivism, the degree of masculinity or femininity in social values, and the degree of uncertainty avoidance or tolerance for ambiguity. Next. So from that research, Hafsid concluded that certain countries consistently show similarities, but there is a clear differences between various grouping of countries on these value dimensions. And the significant conclusion from this research is that the idea that managerial and organizational system as developed and practiced in the parent country and company of MNE should be imposed upon all of its foreign subsidiaries is wrong. Next. Once entrepreneurs conducted research with a similar large-scale study. However, entrepreneurs focus on the cultural accord status to members of their cultures and attitude towards time and nature, which results in relationships between members of society and attitudes toward individuals and groups. And his overall conclusion is similar with Hofstede. And entrepreneurs identified cultural factors in the categories which are universalism versus particularisms, which emphasize on rules versus relationships, and collectivism versus individualism, and range of emotion expressed, which is neutral or versus emotional, and then range of involvement with other people, which is diffuse versus specific, and then the basis for according status to another people as an achievement versus ascription. Next. Um, the results of several studies suggest that some grouping based on its cultural similarities. So there are Anglo, Arab, Far Eastern, Germanic, Latin American, Latin European, Near Eastern, Nordic, and Independent. Some people with extensive international experience might suggest that some of these groups hide significant within group differences. However, the studies benefit that there is a guide as a guidance to general and HR managers in structuring their policies and practices in foreign operations and activities. These studies at a minimum will provide support for decentralizing many aspects of organization structure and offer suggestions for creating regional decisions. Next. And next is Richard Justland approach in cultural differences, which is based on his 30-year career experiences and observations. So he observed the variance in 4 general patterns of cross-cultural business behavior to help understanding the international marketing, negotiating, and managing. So there are 4 general patterns of cross-cultural business behavior. The first one is deal versus focus relationships. So it focus on making or doing the deal rather than building relationships, which will provide a great divide between business cultures. The second one is informal versus formal cultures. So the problem that occurred usually is when informal business traveler from relatively egalitarian cultures from paths cross paths with more formal part of hierarchical societies. The third one is rigid time versus fluid time. So one group of culture sometimes worship clock while the other is more relaxed or flexible. And the fourth one is the expressive versus reserved culture. So expressive people communicate radically different, often create confusion and spoil the best effort to market or manage people across cultures. And this pattern suggests some similarities like differences and additional verification of those that are published by researchers such as Hofstede and Trompenaars. And it also emphasizes on what has been crucial to the practice of management and negotiation. Next. And next is the dangers of oversimplification. So isolating country variances and putting it into group may simplify the management, and international human resource management may oversimplify cultural differences understanding. For example, is the Brennan focus on country differences. So basically, he concludes that it provides little explanation of within group differences, and it treats countries or cultures as homogeneous wholes with everyone within the country and culture being alike. And the second one is provides little understanding of how culture change, because he tends to create culture as a given, impermeable, and static. So basically, his conclusion is an experience shows that culture are not nearly as homogeneous and static as other studies suggest. Next.
So now I'll be explaining about country culture versus multinational enterprises culture. Next. Just as countries develop unique patterns of values, norms, beliefs, and acceptable behavior, so also do companies. Most multinational enterprises take great pride in their organizational cultures, which reflect, at least initially, the values of their founders and evolve to create corporate personalities that give employees a template for how to behave, including how to make decisions, the importance and acceptance of operational concerns such as continual improvement, safety, and ethics, and how to treat fellow employees and customers. For many firms, these organizational values take precedence over country culture, particularly when there is a conflict between the two. For some examples, Scandinavian countries may feel strongly about the assignment of women to senior management positions and will do this even in the cultures where it is rare for women to have these types of appointments. Another one is multinational enterprises from Western countries may feel strongly in favor for egalitarian and participative management styles and compensation practices, and may decide that these values are so important that they will pursue strategies to implement these practices in their foreign operations, even though local culture supports a very different set of values. And the last example is for Asian multinational enterprises. Asian M&Es might emphasize strong group loyalty and discussion with the deference to senior employees in the ways that they operate and make decisions, even in their foreign subsidiaries, and even when this is not an accepted or understood way to operate by local employees and managers. Next. Next, Liv.
This one major issue that affects the relationship between national culture and corporate culture has to do with the perpetual conflict between centralization or standardization and localization or customization. Both are interchangeable terms for the other that basically mean the same thing. Centralization is the idea that home country practices and conduct is applied to host country uh, corporate practices, and localization is the opposite, which allows for the host country workers to operate independently, relatively speaking, in order to adapt to the situation at hand. Next. So this perpetual conflict between centralization and localization is a tug-of-war issue that affects the relationship between national and corporate culture. MNEs try and strive to find the middle ground between the two approaches in order to balance the appropriate amount of centralization and localization, which is on a case-by-case basis. It is almost every time unique to the situation. For example, say if you are a Western company operating in Far Eastern countries like Japan or China, it will the company will have to adjust appropriately to whether or not to introduce Western values or leave Eastern values as is in the Far Eastern subsidiary. This struggle is also applicable to other things other than culture, such as the day-to-day operations of a multinational enterprise. Here we have an example, which is a book example where McDonald's is perpetually struggling to balance corporate standards for service and quality, such as in terms of cleanliness and professionalism within the workers. As far as McDonald's can be concerned, with the customization approach that aims to cater to local tastes. For example, McDonald's headquarters would expect all McDonald's in the world to at least adhere to some form of health standard, which varies by country to country, but I'm quite sure they would like to present an image of sterility and cleanliness across all McDonald's outlets, even though they're franchises. But at the same time, they want to balance the centralization of an expectation for service and quality with a local approach. For example, here we have the localization of McDonald's menus, such as burger rendang and nasi uduk, if I recall correctly. And as such, that would need quite a different supply chain, comparatively speaking, to other outlets around the world. So it is a constant balancing act that McDonald's have to face in their operations. Okay. Next. So there is the controversy of convergence, which is a recent phenomenon in the world that is caused by globalization. It is the melding of dominant cultural values and characteristics into other countries' cultures due to the adoption of similar best practices by firms around the world. In order to, say, purposefully made to maximize efficiency. It is controversial because it may result in the downplaying of local customs, sacrificing that for central control. The opposite of the convergence phenomenon is divergence, which is the case where local values and practices strongly influence business conduct and thus making each business conduct distinct while still efficient, but reducing central control. It has been theorized. Next. Yeah, it has been theorized that convergence and divergence is at opposing ends of one spectrum, where there is convergence on one end and divergence on the other. And as such, it is seen as opposing forces, and the prevailing view at the moment is how companies can try to achieve an optimal trade-off between global and local approaches, between allowing for divergence or convergence. This view is eschewed by Vance and Pike in 2011, whom posited how instead of trying to achieve a trade-off, which signifies an antagonistic inverse relationship between convergence and divergence, companies can try to achieve a symbiotic, balanced mixing of cultural systems, termed by them as cross-vergence, which allows for localization in the form of divergence, how local cultures can influence business practices for efficiency while still retaining control from overseas. And that is the view that Vance and Pike have presented in the book.
Okay, and now we're going to talk about the research in international human resource management. So the impact of culture on international human resource management, there varies. There quite the impact. For example, from the international human resource management, it requires the recruiting and hiring practices, and then building business relationship with globally, and the role and use of multiple languages and communication, and like perceptions of organizational justice, the impact to decision making in the human resource, performance evaluations and feedback, management and leadership development, the development of a global mindset, and varying perspectives on careers across cultures. Okay, so in the conclusion for this chapter, in this chapter, we can learn two things. That the chapter described the concepts of national and MNE cultures and discussed their importance to the successful conduct of international business. And the second one is it described the importance of culture to international human resource management and the impact on the difficulties encountered in conducting the human resource management research. The advice from this chapter is MNEs and their managers need understanding and appreciation for these differences as well as cultural competencies in working within this varying culture context.
So, so for the next one is about the case study. So in the ebook, in the ebook, there is two case study, but I choose the second one is about the employee that sparked outrage at the searching factory in China. So in the July 16, 2009, a 25 years old Foxconn employee named Sun Dayong commit to suicide by the jumping from the 12th floor of his apartment building. Mr. Sun, who worked at the electronic factory in season, has been putting a charge of a prototype of a new Apple iPhone that went missing. Mr. Sun that has sparked outrage about the labor condition at the China factory and the Western company and sorts from them. Foxconn manufacturing electronic for some of the world's largest company, including Sony, Hewlett-Packard, and Apple. When the prototype iPhone went missing, Foxconn allegedly accused Mr. Sun of the thief on initiate and initiate of the investigation. On the day before his death, Mr. Sun told his friend he had been and humiliated by the factory security guard. Mr. Sun and suicide has been brought an approach for the further complaint against the Foxconn, including unpaid overtime and humiliating management regime. However, it's not only the Foxconn that had taken blame for the suicide and the condition that led it. The Western giant that source of Foxconn, Apple in particular, have received a criticism for their culture of secrecy when the many believe encourage militant management at their factors. This company intends effort to uh, protect their trade secret at the searching factors in China point to another difficulty and searching from the China intellectual property right violence. Property brands like Apple are counterfeit heavily in China, and prototype thief is a real and Western problem. Foreign company that source from China must for work very fine and between protecting their intellectual property and ensuring uh, reasonable working condition and compliant by the international and local standard. Management that to lenient subject to company to thief counterfeit, but overly militant management regime may lead to the immune working condition and potential event tragedy like the suicide of Mr. Sun. So we go to the next page. So for the next page is about the question case study. So the first question is, why did the Mr. Sun commit to suicide, and was the Mr. Sun reaction and equation of the thief something that only might be expected in China? So I think this case is, I think is the suicide of Mr. Sun not only escape from the equation of the thief something, but this is direction involved more than the thief and intellectual property. Behind the simple fact of the thief, also Mr. Sun get beaten and humiliated by the security guard, and I think also it's because Mr. Sun get overtime job from the company, but he don't get paid, and I think the pressure that he have make him want to kill himself. And for the next question is about is the thief of the intellectual property is a problem everywhere? Why or why not? Does every culture view of importance of the intellectual property it's the same way? If we talking about the thief, yes, it's wrong because the intellectual property is a part of the company. It's just like we know like in the music, it's just like a record or label, but in the big company firm is intellectual property is just like a copyright. So if someone that stealing the intellectual property or stealing the content from another company, yes, is wrong. And and for does every culture view of important of the intellectual property is the same way? I think yes, because like I say before, um, uh, intellectual property is the part of the company. So every company needs intellectual property. Is because it can save the content, or it can that uh, another company cannot take our content. So the third question is, why the thief of intellectual property such as concern in the foreign subcontract, and why can be done to control it? So if we talking about why intellectual property is concerned in the foreign subcontract, it's just like uh, if we do the subcontract with the foreign, we cannot trust them 100%. We can maybe just 50%, and because the foreign is just work for our project, not work for our company. So this is why it's so concerned that we need to control the foreign. And what can we be done to control it? I think maybe the company needs to analyze, or maybe consultant that can always see what the progress that they have, and also know they are stealing or not. And also the analyst can also check another company content or company project that are same with us or not. So yeah, so it can avoid from the intellectual property. So that's all for me.
Yeah, that's all for our presentation. Thank you for listening.